Okay, welcome guys to another session of the Sister Act podcast. We're so glad to be back after our little short vacation and hiatus. It's part of life that things happen, and we take advantage of the fact that we too have lives and we have to cater to a couple of other things in our lives. But nevertheless, summer is a great time to reconnect back with ourselves and our families, and then get back to work. Today, our episode is titled "Coming to America: Our Personal Journeys," and Rabbi Susan and I are so looking forward to this and having our amazing third co-host join our show, Dr. Sabrina Dent, who is just an amazing woman. I'm just going to read a little bit of her bio and then introduce you to her. And I'm pretty sure a lot of you do already know her and the great work that she does. Sabrina Dent is the Senior Faith Advisor at Americans United for Separation of Church and State. Sabrina is a lifelong advocate for human rights and social justice. Throughout her career, she has worked with vulnerable populations, including women and children impacted by domestic violence and abuse, youth with mental health and behavioral challenges, and racial and religious minorities. However, she developed a passion as a religious freedom advocate in 2015 when she became a BJC Fellow with the Baptist Joint Committee for Religious Liberty. Before joining the AU team, Sabrina worked as Director of Recruitment and Admissions at the Religious Freedom Center of the Freedom Forum, where she managed several of the education initiatives designed for religious and civic leaders, including a 3-year project funded by the Henry Luce Foundation titled Religious Freedom: African American Perspectives. Sabrina earned her Master of Divinity degree and Doctor of Ministry degree from STVU. Her doctoral dissertation project title was Bridging the Gap of Race and Interfaith Relations, Connecting Humanity with Our Stories. She earned her bachelor's degree from Virginia Tech. Sabrina is a native of Petersburg, Virginia, and a proud mother. Her favorite place in the world to visit is South Africa. Welcome, Sabrina, to Sister Act. We're so delighted that you are here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be with both of you today.
Yes, we're excited about the conversations we're going to have and just to see where this takes us in our life. And spending this time with both of you is really going to be an amazing journey for me and my growth. So I'm really looking forward to everything that's going to come our way.
Yes, I look forward to the same. I enjoyed our brief conversation the other day, and so I know there's so much more to share about ourselves. So yes, I look forward to it. Yeah.
So one of the really exciting aspects of coming together now and having this our new configuration and having all three of us here together is that we're really beginning this journey together and sharing and moving forward. But in order for us to move forward together, we also need to know more about each other, our past, our background, our journeys, which though may have started in different places, as our journeys intersect and come together, and as we move forward together, each of us and our communities are stronger because of that, the background and the richness of our heritage and our legacies that we bring to this conversation. And certainly a foundation for all the conversations that we have moving forward. So Sabrina, as we get to know each other even better in the process, and yes, we had a wonderful initial conversation, and I'm really excited for all the opportunities we're going to have moving forward. Such a blessing to be with both of you. So I'm wondering if you would be willing to start and share your journey, your personal journey, but also your family and your background, your journey, as we've titled it, in coming to America. We all came from other places, and those stories are disparate and different, and also I'm sure have some similarities among them as well. And I look forward to hearing a bit about yours.
Yes. So thank you. I'm actually happy and excited to share a little bit about my history. One of the things that was read in my bio is that I am a native of Petersburg, Virginia. And I like to tell people that because sometimes people only see you for who you are right now, but don't know the history that comes with you, and your family history. And so my parents, well, I was born and raised in Petersburg, Virginia. My parents, Larry and Thurdale Dent, who I absolutely adore and love, my dad is from Chesapeake, Virginia, but my mom is from Alexandria, Virginia, and she was born in Lynchburg. And one of the things that, when we said we were going to talk about, our family history and family histories and our journey, I was like, uh-oh, okay. I was like, there's some more research that I have to do, because the reality of it is there are a lot of people of color that don't know all of their family history, and that includes me. So this weekend, I was very intentional about spending more time talking to one of my aunts, because I knew about my dad's family, in terms of my grandfather, Kiever Howard Dent, who was a longshoreman. And then I knew about my great-grandfather, Bishop Howard Dent, from North Carolina, who actually had, with his wife, 21 children. And so, yes, 21 children. And so my grandfather, Kiever Howard, was one of those. But what I learned this weekend was the names of my great-grandfather and my great-great-great-grandfather. So talking about family history, one of the things that I learned is that my great-great-great-grandfather's name is Napoleon Dent. And he was from Warren County, North Carolina, and he was born around 1841. The records show two different things in two different places, but my family has 1845, but I saw 1841 somewhere else. But he was born an enslaved African. And so, so my family history is different. It wasn't necessarily by choice that my family was brought to the Americas. But the beauty of that was I had the opportunity to see his emancipation documents. And so to see that, I actually have a mug here that said my ancestors were not free in 1776, is because the emancipation documents show that my great-great-great-grandfather was emancipated on April 4th, 1865. And so I can't begin to tell you the feelings that I experienced this weekend, reading about his history, and then also about Ananias, who was his son, to learn about, to know these names. For me, I've always said, my ancestors, or I was the descendants of enslaved Africans, but to actually have a name to say was really big for me. And then on the other side of it, I also have my mother's family. Like I said, my mother was raised in Alexandria, Virginia. And she was actually born in Lynchburg, and she was put up for adoption. So the grandmother that raised her was Rebecca Fleming, who we knew as grandma our entire life, but we also knew my mom's birth mother, Mary Bass. And so there's such richness to their stories. But because our podcast talks about faith and life and resilience, one of the things that I am most proud of is the resilience of my grandmother. So my grandmother, when she adopted my mom, was in her 60s, and she was 9 years old when she left her family, because her mother went to Georgia. So she was on her own since she was 9 years old. But yet, this woman managed to live a life where she was a cleaning lady for the Pentagon for many, many years. But she owned 2 houses at one point. And so I'm just baffled by the fact that this woman with a 4th grade education, who was also a very feisty person, in the sense that I'll say, my mom showed me that she actually had a police record. So she was a fighter. She didn't take anything, but I'd imagine at being on your own since 9 years old, you had to learn how to fight. You had to take care of yourself. So there are a lot of qualities between that grandmother and even my paternal grandmother, Geraldine Dent, again, a woman of resilience, who raised 4 beautiful children, that I have those characteristics that they embodied. And so, coming from Petersburg, Virginia, where, you know, it is, unfortunately, is ranked #2 as far as the poorest places to live in Virginia. It's a place where it's predominantly African American, and it doesn't have a high livable wage that people earned. So I also consider myself to be in a place of privilege to even have doctor in front of my name, to be able to have been able to have two parents who were college sweethearts, to then, you know, continue my education and go forward. And so, you know, there's a lot of resilience in my family, and also a lot of fighters in my family. As my aunt said, you know, my aunt Eleanor said, she said, our family has very talented people. And so I celebrate that and realize that I stand on their shoulders. I wouldn't be who I am today without them. And I recognize that and I celebrate that. And so I'm the second of 3 children. I have an older sister and a younger brother, and I have lots of nieces and nephews that I love incredibly. And of course, my son. So all of this makes me who I am. And also, because of the diversity, even of our religious identities within my family. So my great grandfather was a holiness bishop. You know, my grandfather was a very dedicated Baptist deacon. My parents were Pentecostal. I was licensed as a Baptist minister, but at some point along the way, I was a part of many other religious communities that I embraced, and that was a big part of my spiritual formation. So there's a lot of texture to my history and my journey, as I'm sure that you all have the same. So.
Wow, that's a lot of history that I'm pretty sure we're going to need a couple of more episodes diving into just your family's lineage and, you know, where they came from. Do you have information of your family, which part of Africa they came from, and when they were enslaved, where they were taken from?
You know, it's funny that you say that, because my aunt gave me like numbers, because you do ancestry, you do this the DNA test, and it tells you, you know, you have parts of your family from Nigeria, parts of the family from the Congo, then you have other parts of your family that are from Cameroon. So of course my mother's DNA test in terms of where they came from is all different. And the thing about it is I don't know exactly where. Like, I know there are parts at some point we were told Cameroon, but the information also changes. So it's very interesting when you compare family members' DNA results. But one of the things that I think is important for people to know when we talk about that, right? When you talk about people who are descendants of enslaved Africans, it's like you're living and trying to piece the story together at the same time. And so, you know, although that you know, you could get a DNA test and it says, you know, or you can get a test and it says, well, your family is from this area, it still doesn't tell you about the people, right? And so, you know, it was interesting for me. Like, I was excited to see, you know, farmer beside some relative's name, or even if they had domestic beside the person's name, at least I knew something about them more than, you know, in addition to what my aunt may have shared about the individual. So I think it's important to know that. So it goes to show, like, I have more research to do, which is also important, because when I think about my own child, my child's father is from Zimbabwe. He lives in South Africa. And so I'm very, last year I took my son to South Africa so he could, you know, meet his family. That was really big for me, because I don't want that mystery to be there around, like, where he's from. Like, it's like, you know, this is a part of your family lineage and, you know, your history. And that is just so important for people to know. So I'm grateful that my aunt is the family historian the way she is.
I know that's an amazing thing to even have all of that information, because a lot of it with the enslaved has been lost, right? A lot of people's history, a lot of their records, people whose family has died off, and there really is no record of who they were and what they went through. And that's the sad part of the history of this country. But you are lucky to have that information passed down to you. And then I'm going to ask you one question before I hand it over to the rabbi. Is 21 kids? Oh my God.
Yeah,
I thought my family was big. I'm like, wait a minute. Do you know all of their names? Because I have a hard time with my own siblings. And are they all in Virginia?
I don't know all of their names. I don't know all their names. I have a list of some of the names that are there, but yeah, that's a lot of children. So my parents only had 3. I only have 1. So, you know, I really
Do you know like where they're living? Are they close to you in Virginia, or have they kind of spread around?
Yeah. So there are family members in different parts of the United States, but there's still a lot of family down in the North Carolina area. So Warren County, North Carolina, or Reduco, North Carolina is where they are. My family has a family reunion, the Dent Austin family reunion, where they get together. And so that's where a lot of this information also comes up. You have family members that have done like incredible research. So they're in different places. A lot of my dad's siblings, for the most part, 3 are in Virginia, and then my uncle is in Ohio. So, but then I think about like my own family history. Like I'm in Virginia, my brother's in Virginia, but my sister is out in Nevada. So who knows where, you know, what history will be shaped because she's out in Nevada.
So I'll speak on behalf of the rabbi and I, your next family reunion outside of COVID. We want to be invited. I do want to meet your relatives because I'm just at this whole 21 number. And I'm sure because they're 21, their families and their extended families, you know, Rabbi Susan and I will be honorary members.
Yeah.
If we can come.
Believe me, I'm still meeting family members.
That's awesome. That's awesome. That's the best part of it.
Yeah.
Rabbi Susan, do you have any questions you want to ask?
So just as you were starting to ask yours, I happen to be where the printer is in the house, and somebody's summer math packet is being printed up as we speak. So I have that going on. This COVID world is, it is what it is. But I also was, you know, certainly hold on, sorry. I don't want her to lose steam.
That's true. It's all good.
Yeah, the world we live in right now.
Yeah.
So I wanted to pick up on, you know, already seeing some of those lines of connection too. You talked a bit about some of your family's background and some of the variety of faith in terms of connections, but also I'm curious about how much of that, or how all of that has come down to you, because I know in terms of your own spiritual path, from what I know, there is a diversity and a magnitude as well, an embrace of different traditions, and I'm curious as to all the different faith traditions that have been passed down to you.
Right. So, I mean, like I said, my father was a Pentecostal preacher. And so I grew up in the Pentecostal tradition. It was actually when I went to college that I had the opportunity to look at something that was different from Pentecostalism. It was in my freshman English class. I was told to read the Tao and also the book, The Power of Myth. And I felt like that was the first time I ever had permission to do something outside of my own religion. Now, it's also very interesting because when I was in college, I think it was my sophomore year in college, my dad mailed me a Talmud and actually had like the pages marked for the role of the woman. And I was like, I'm so confused as to why my dad is sending me this right now. But my dad was reading a lot about, you know, Jewish history, and he just really embraced it. And so for me, it gave me even more permission to look at, you know, different things. So one of the biggest things that was of influence was taking a world religions class when I was in seminary, that I had already started. I was already a part of different communities at some point, because at some point I studied Scientology. I was introduced to it by a friend. Never said I was a Scientologist. And I try to make sure I make that clarity for people, only because I don't want to claim something that I know I wasn't a part of, but the classes were incredible in shaping who I am. And then also, I would say one person that was really critical into helping shape or influence my spiritual formation was my friend Sloan Lee. Sloan was someone who didn't belong to any faith tradition. He didn't acknowledge anything. He didn't talk about God, but he talked about aliens. And I could connect with that because my mom used to watch Star Trek with us growing up. And so we always had this mindset that there is something bigger than the rest of us. And so, so as I continue to meet people on my own personal journey, I just continue to ask questions and realize like nothing was going to happen to me if I was a part of a different religious tradition. Nothing was going to happen to me if I asked questions other than getting more information and being more informed. And a critical moment for me was in 2007 when I was in South Africa and I went to visit a Buddhist temple. And I walked in and the monk said to me, would you like to make an offering to the Buddha to bless your family? And without hesitation, I said, yes. You know, I started writing down their names on a piece of paper because I was just like, why wouldn't I want my family to be blessed? Like, I don't know where blessings come from. Like, it's just like, you know, other than saying like from God, you know, God gives blessings or the universe in the language that I sometimes use, but this all shaped my experiences. And then also meeting people at the Interfaith Council of Greater Richmond was a critical time in my life. I was still in school and seminary, and Dean at the time, Dean John W. Kinney, Dr. Kinney, he allowed me to do an independent study, and I did an independent study on comparative theologies of Christianity and Buddhism. And I found like, it was like the most beautiful thing for me to do. And so Buddhism, you know, was very influential. I eventually ended up going to Buddhist meditation and taking my son. That was a big part of our lives. And so being a part of an interfaith environment, I seized every moment and opportunity to introduce him to other religions because I wanted him to have an awareness about the beauty of the many different ways in which people connect to the divine or express their love and understanding for the divine. And so, you know, and so that's how I raised him. I raised him to be respectful of all religions and of all people and to ask like healthy, good questions, you know, and he does. Like he's 12, but he's been asking questions for a long time. So all of that has shaped my own spiritual formation. But the one thing I never forgot from my Pentecostal tradition, because who I am today is probably far from what most Pentecostals would want to say, oh, she's Pentecostal, is like spirit, this whole thing about spirit. And I truly believe that spirit flows through every tradition. It's like, you know, when you think about indigenous people. And so all of that belief shapes who I am today. And so that's why I simply identify as a spiritual person and not with one particular religious tradition. I know that was a lot.
No, that's great. That's great because it gives us a lot of things to talk about. And, you know, since we all love to talk, it's just added on to that conversation. But thank you so much for sharing so much of yourself, Sabrina, and the things that you've gone through and the things that your family has gone through and your kind of own religious, spiritual journey. And I'm sure that's always evolving. It's even evolving for me. And I'm sure even for the rabbi, even within our own faith, because you're not always supposed to be stagnant, right? You're supposed to be moving and learning and changing and becoming a better person. So thank you, Sabrina, for sharing that.
Oh, my pleasure.
So Rabbi Susan, it's your turn. And so, you know, we think we know people's story. Like if somebody were to tell me you're a rabbi, I'd be like, okay, she's a rabbi, and, you know, maybe she's from some European country and, you know, her family did this, and then that would be it, because my perception is very limited because of what I've been exposed to. But I'm sure the rich history of your family's journey to America and what you've gone through is much more than that. So please enlighten us.
Thank you. And like Sabrina, I spent time this weekend, even though I've heard much of the family history over the years. I also, you know, I wanted to get some of it right, and I wanted to hash out some details with my parents, and actually went down some of those rabbit holes. And when we start to do research, there's more and more and more. So today I have a bit, and I'm sure more of it will unfold over our conversations to come as well. So, you know, in some ways, I think, Hernessa, you're right in certain guesses, also because, you know, I'm from New York. So Um, so a rabbi from New York, and that may be stereotypical in certain ways. I grew up in just outside of New York City in New Rochelle, New York, where my grandfather was my rabbi, and we'll come back to that a little bit later on. But I also, and my parents were both born and raised in New York. My father was born in New Rochelle, where I grew up. I wasn't born there, but grew up there. And my mother from New York City, from the Bronx, and they met in college. But their family stories, there are certainly some similarities, and I'll just kind of go through I have, fortunately I have pieces of family history from every quadrant. So on my mom's side, and I have a lot of this written. I'm not going to share all of it, but I have a lot of it. On my mom's side, her her grandfather, so my great grandfather, right, and her great uncle came from Vilna, which was, as they always say in my family, it was sometimes Russia, it was sometimes Poland, but Vilna. It was always changing hands back in those days. In the late 19th century, they came probably in the 1890s is around when, and their father was a horse trader. They came in part because their mother wanted to, their mother Rose didn't want her sons to go into the Cossack army, and at the time there was a conscription. They came, they took boys, they took a lot of young Jewish boys were taken into the army at an early age, and in order to avoid that, she sent them away. And my great grandmother Celia, who I grew up fortunately knowing, and was one of the first strong women I encountered. She was about, I may be off, she was about 4'8", maybe 4'10". This little Russian, well, Yiddish, she spoke Yiddish. I actually wear my engagement ring was her ring, and she came over when she was about 14 or so, also in the late 19th century, 1890s, on her own. And she came and was sent through Holland and then England, and came to New York, where her brothers met her. And she was a seamstress who really worked her way up. She made designer clothes, and they worked together to save money and bring their parents over from Russia, Poland, at the end of the 19th, early 20th century. And actually, as my mom put it, when their father came over, so this is my great grandfather, I believe that's right, that he decided, he'd worked already, that he would let the kids take care of him. So once he got here, and they did, and they worked incredibly hard, and so my great grandmother Celia and Sam met in New York. Sam came by himself at the age of 10. I mean, as all these stories, when I imagine, one of my children going even on an airplane across the country, but really go back then, being put on a boat across the ocean, with the type of communication was back then. It's amazing to think about the way parents were, wanting to make sure there was a better life for their children. So my great grandmother Celia and great grandfather Sam met in New York. He had come at the age of 10 from Kiev, and they settled in New York, and they raised 6 children, including my grandmother Beatrice, who was called Bibi. That's Nana Bibi, who was an amazing pianist, and eventually, she actually went to Juilliard, although she ended up, she didn't finish at Juilliard. She went to secretarial school, and but it was Catherine Gibbs, which was very, they had to wear white gloves to for their work as part of their training as well. So she was certainly very much raised and a product of New York at the time. And on my maternal grandfather's family has an interesting history. Actually, has been traced back at some point to that the family name was Ragoza, and they were from Zaragoza, Spain. And so they were in Spain, although they were kicked out of Spain as part of the Spanish Inquisition and the expulsion of Jews from Spain in 1492. And eventually, though there are rumors or there are stories of lore that maybe some came over on those famous boats that came in 1492, launched the same day as the expulsion order. But some of the family went to Italy, and from Italy through Poland, because education was really important to them, and there were higher seats of learning, certainly in Jewish education in the Jewish world. They wanted to be in those places where of study and education and learning, and some actually went to what was then Palestine, and as it comes down to me, sort of somewhere between 1492 and then a few generations back, my great-grandfather, Nathan Grabiner, and the name was actually Grabina, but they changed it to make it sound more American, which actually is something that happened on the other side on my dad's side of the family too, a little bit differently, but you'll hear it. But Grabina, which changed to Grabiner, was from Bruk, Poland. And he met my great-grandmother, Lena Tepper, who was from Lvov, Poland. And they married in Poland in 1908 and came almost immediately, I believe, to New York in 1908. And my great-grandfather, Nathan, was a master, a journeyman carpenter. We do have Lena's naturalization papers that she became a citizen in 1929. And Nathan's cousins went to lots of different places, which we're still uncovering. And I believe it was on Ancestry.com. My mom's made all these different connections, and there's a Facebook group with the extended family as well. So I haven't even started to explore that. But cousins went to Minnesota and went to Puerto Rico and to other places. And my grandfather, Martin, was born in 1914 in Harlem, in New York City. His older brother, Benjamin, I don't know much about him other than that he had polio as a child. But my grandfather went to City College for college and also graduate school. He studied chemistry. He would have been a doctor, but there were not the funds for him to continue through a medical degree. And he ended up he was a research scientist doing medical research when my grandmother met him. And not surprising, knowing both of them and knowing my grandfather, my Papa Marty, lived to make my grandmother, my Nana Bibi, happy. She was concerned that with all of his medical research, that he was going to bring home some disease or something. So he sort of changed his profession a little bit and actually made her even happier when he went into cosmetic chemistry. Originally perfumes and some well-known companies, Marley Savant Claire, soaps, fragrances, Georgette Klinger. And then for about 20 years, and this is really what I knew him during this time, he was a cosmetic chemist and in quality control at Clinique and Estee Lauder, which I, as a kid especially, loved. He would bring home things and samples, and then my grandmother would be able to there was always Clinique and Estee Lauder products around, certainly around her house. And so that's, that side of the family, their sort of story of coming together. And I had a real blessing to spend many, many weekends at their home, about 20 minutes, half an hour from us in New York. They lived on Long Island in Great Neck. And so I used to spend a lot of time there. And so that's my mom's side of the family. And in a nutshell, there's more. I mean, I started to go through look through this Facebook group, and I said, I'm going to wait on that because I only have so much time today. And my dad's side is a little bit different. My grandmother's, my paternal grandmother, her name was Miriam, and she was Mimi. So I had Nana Bibi and Nana Mimi. But her family was originally the Frank family. They came to the United States early, in fact, and part of the early wave of mainly German Jewish immigrants, but in the 1840s. And her family actually came from Alsace, and they came and they settled in different areas. There was apparently a cousin in Maryland and Eastern Shore and Delaware who were in farming, but her family came from Strasbourg in Alsace, and they ended up in Ohio, mainly in Cincinnati, or as my grandmother used to call it when I was growing up, Cincinnati, but Cincinnati and Sandusky and Lancaster, Ohio. And somewhere along the line, we actually have my great-great-grandfather was a drummer boy during the Civil War for the North. They were close to the river in Cincinnati, but he was definitely a drummer boy for the North, which is part of the family lore of how long we'd been here. And then as well, somewhere along the line, someone, maybe a great-grandfather, either someone married and changed the name to be Frankenstein because Frank was not German enough for that part of Ohio at that time. And this is before Frankenstein, the book, was written. But so Frankenstein, which is when we were growing up, we thought that was very funny that was my grandmother's maiden name. But there was a very rich German culture in that part of Ohio, and that was part of, sort of fitting in. My great-grandfather, Eli Garfield Frankenstein, was an attorney who he took the name Garfield because he liked Garfield. He didn't actually have a middle name, but he represented those people in the community who really didn't have means. Apparently, he also ran in a primary for Congress, which he lost. He lost to Longworth. I don't know the first name, but Longworth of the Longworth office building. But was very involved in the community. And he met and married my great-grandmother, Bess Dreyfus, who was there were 5 girls, and my great-grandmother, Bess, and great-grandfather Eli had my grandmother, Miriam. And there's some interesting family stories. My grandmother was an only child, but she also had 2 cousins who were also only children. And there's one story related to one of them there was a family member who was on the Titanic, or may have been on the Titanic. And on the other cousin was a Ford model at one point, and they were in the country a long time. Lots of stories that go along with that as well. And my grandmother went to the University of Cincinnati, and she studied English, poetry. I think it was then, maybe it was called literature, not English at the time, but she was very into literature and poetry and classical books, classics. And she met my grandfather. As I said, she grew up in Cincinnati, and I'll get to my grandfather's lineage, but my grandfather was in Cincinnati studying to be a rabbi at Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion, which is the Reform seminary that I attended many years later in Cincinnati. And my great-grandmother had this goal. She had one daughter. She wanted to marry her off in the right way. And in that community, they used to have, my great-grandmother used to have all the rabbinic students often to dinner or to Passover Seder. And it was there that my grandmother met my grandfather at Passover Seder table. and they became they were actually the first wedding celebrated in the chapel at Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati, which was really meaningful and poignant for me because 70 years after they got married in 1930, we brought my daughter Isabel, actually my grandmother carried my daughter Isabel in to be named in that same chapel, which is where Michael and I were living when she was born. So they moved to Troy, New York, outside Albany, where my grandfather had his first pulpit as a rabbi. And my grandmother finished college at Russell Sage College in Troy. So that piece.
Wow.
And then my grandfather, Jacob Shankman, who, as I mentioned earlier, was my rabbi growing up. And his family history is also fascinating, in part because on both sides of his family tree, there are rabbis going back to about the 14th century. In just about every generation, it skipped one before it came to me. And my father became a pilot, as he always has liked to say. He always felt like flying has brought him close to God in different ways, and the miracle of that, and the awesomeness of that. But I grew up in my grandfather's congregation, and certainly with this very rich family history of rabbis back in the generations. My great grandparents came to the United States on their honeymoon. Isaac and Dina, or as they called her, Dinah, they came to Boston on their honeymoon and stayed, and they settled in Massachusetts, and there's much more. In fact, my grandfather wrote, this is actually the translation my cousin had done, a family history of his side of the family. I actually have it in both it's Hebrew / Yiddish, and this is the translation with including like family trees and really going back, which is such a gift to have. And so there's much more I could share on that. Yeah. But I know, Sabrina, that you had a question. So that's sort of in a nutshell. And I always felt it's so interesting because on my husband's side, his parents were born here, but his grandparents weren't. And it was always growing up, I often thought it seemed unusual that all of my grandparents were born here, and our family had been here, for a long period of time, relatively speaking, in the Jewish community.
Wow. Rabbi Susan, that is amazing. Like, you have such rich history, and you actually have it in your hands too. So that's so amazing. One of the things that I was thinking about, as you affectionately talked about your grandmother, I thought that was really beautiful, and to hear a little bit about her story. But you talked about the different places where your family lived and came from, and I wanted to know, like, have you had an opportunity to go to any of those places to really be present, and what was that like? If not, is that something that you hope to do, and to even take your children there?
That's a great question. I actually was thinking about this the other day too when we were talking about that, and I know that you were able to experience that with your son and think about places that your family's been. We haven't been, they've been to the places in the United States that family is from, but we haven't been to, I've been to Poland, but not to the specific cities that my family's from. I haven't yet journeyed to those places, and that's certainly something I would like to do. And I've never been to Russia. So those are on my list, but even experiencing being in those, being in whether Warsaw or Krakow, and having that sense of being nearby, but certainly something that I'd like to do in the future. I've always dreamed of going to Spain, sort of going back to those roots as well. In fact, a few years ago, I think on the anniversary of the Inquisition, of the Spanish expulsion, there was a statement made by the Spanish government about for those wanting to reclaim their Spanish not identity, but even there was an opening for being able to apply for a passport, and thinking
Okay.
about, there are times that we've thought about that would be interesting to do. But just knowing that there are all these different places, and also wondering, being in other places, family. I have these couple of towns, but as we all know, family is much broader than just one or two towns, and where else might that family have been? And also, what's been fascinating with Facebook, especially, is
Yeah.
being able to connect and discovering family who, all over, and finding those connections. But yeah, I'd love to be able to go back and trace those roots one day.
Wow.
I
Thank
might
you
have to wait a few years right now.
Right. Oh, yes. Especially right now with COVID-19. Yeah, we'll wait for a while. But thank you for sharing your story. I mean, I know we could spend so much more time just talking to one another about like our experiences in our family. So, but Hernissa, I want to know more about your story and your journey, because I know you have that cute little photo on Facebook right now too. So can you tell us more about your personal journey and your families?
I'm trying to figure out which cute picture you're talking about because I have a few cute pictures.
They're all cute, all cute. I think
hello.
with your siblings.
Oh, my siblings. Oh, the ones with my nieces, you mean?
Yes, you're
Yeah,
in
the one in the middle?
Yes.
Yeah. So those are my brothers, my eldest brother's two daughters. One is 2 years older, one is 1 year younger, and that's who I grew up playing with. So family. Both my parents are originally from a city called Samarkand in Uzbekistan, which is south of Russia in Asia. In the 1920s, after the Soviets had invaded, at that time they were called the Soviets, now they're called Russians. My grandfather was actually, my father's father was imprisoned. His wealth was taken away. They really, restricted any movements for the Muslims in that area. So my father's cousins, my grandfather's cousins, were actually wrestlers, and so they came to the jail and they bribed the guard, and my grandfather escaped through the sewer system, which was just a hole in the ground. Came back home, went to the outside bathroom because the bathrooms were outside of the home at that time. Took a shower. Had hired a smuggler to smuggle him out of Uzbekistan. And that's what he did. And then a few hours later, the guards came looking for him inside the house. If they had gone out to see the bathroom, they would have known he was there because the filth was still there. And so my father's father, escaped and smuggled himself into Mazar-e-Sharif, which is the northern city in Afghanistan. And so after a while, he sent another smuggler to smuggle my grandmother, his wife, my dad, his other son, and a newborn baby. So my grandmother was actually left alone to take care of them. My grandfather was not allowed to claim any of his property or his wealth, and he had a lot of that in Samarkand. My mom's family left way before. So majority of her and her siblings were born in Afghanistan. So once both my grandparents were in Mazar-e-Sharif, they moved from Mazar to Kabul, Afghanistan. And my dad was about 20 years old, and my mom was 15. Never seen each other. They ended up getting married, which is very normal for that part of the world at that time. It's just like, oh, here's your bride. Lucky you. You're stuck for life. And so my dad's, my mom and my dad got married, and my dad actually went to school up until 6th grade, and he had to leave because he had to help my grandfather in his business. But my dad was extremely smart, even till for his 6th grade education, was a very successful person in Afghanistan. He acquired a lot of wealth in Kabul. We lived in a very affluent area named Kartese, which is there still, and the house that he built is still there. He had ended up selling it when we had to leave. And between both my parents, my mom actually gave birth to 17 kids. Only 10 survived past the age of 2, just because of medical reasons and just not having the right medical care in Kabul. So that's what ended up happening. I my sister always pointed out growing up, was the mistake child, because my mom had me when she was 50. She already had 2 grandkids. And then once she found out she was pregnant with me, then she found out my brother's wife was pregnant with her 3rd child. And so she was having a really hard time accepting that she's going to have a child that's younger than her grandkids. And then there's going to be another one coming along the way, so it was, although it was normal in Afghanistan at that time to have aunts and uncles who were younger than the nieces and the nephews, but for my mother, it was just a little bit too much to endure at that time. But my father was like, no, we're having this baby, don't worry about it. And then there I was. I'm the youngest out of all the 17. So there was no more after me. By the time my mom had me, she was 50. My dad was 55. Like I said, already had grandkids. And then, right around the same time, the Soviets, the Russians invaded Afghanistan, and they invaded Kabul. We had tanks outside our house. My dad's driver, who at that time was actually part of the Mujahideen, smuggled us out of Kabul. So now my father is escaping the Soviets again, 50 years later. And he took us out in batches. We didn't all leave at the same time because the tanks were literally outside of our home. And so he would take us out in batches. First, my older siblings went, then some of us. And then the last 2 to remain was my second eldest sister and my father. And so he even told them, like, don't even take off the curtains in your home because they'll know that you're moving, and you don't want them to know that you're moving. We left a lot of things, and a lot of the pictures you see that I put on Facebook are the only ones that I have left of, even my own childhood or my baby photos. There are very few because everything else was left. And then my dad ended up having to sell the house. So we left and we became refugees in Pakistan. But because my father was well off, we didn't have to stay at the camps. He ended up renting an apartment in Karachi in a brand new building that was put up at that time. But there was like a whole gang of us, my brother, his gazillion kids, us, my other sibling, my parents. So it was like you could tell that there was immigrants there, refugees living together. It was just not at the camp. I learned to speak Urdu at a very young age because I was there from the time I was 2, 3, and 4. And so Urdu is actually my second language that I learned to speak. Farsi is my first. And we stayed there for about 3 years. And I have a lot of good memories of Pakistan and a lot of my friends. Apparently, I was the ringleader in the building, even amongst the girls who were older than me. My sister always calls me the bossy one. And so apparently I was the ringleader with these kids. But then, we used to go to the stores that were down in the lobby. They were all in the middle part of the square building. In the middle was like this open area. People used to play and have little stores and stuff. And because I was, Afghan who spoke Urdu, all the candy store owners would give us free candy. So I was like, hey, there's an added benefit to all of this. And that before we left Afghanistan, my father actually sent my second eldest brother here to study. So he was here before the Soviets invaded Kabul. And so we couldn't stay in Pakistan because we had no citizenship. We had no legal status there. So we started the whole refugee process. And that's how we ended up coming to the United States in 83. But before we ended up coming, March 1st of 1983 was when my mom passed away in Karachi, Pakistan. That's where she's buried. She never made it to the United States. And so I was 5 at that time. And it was just a really horrific time to go through with my family. That's something that I still struggle with even today emotionally, and having that void in my life of not having my mother around. And then that was March. May, my dad and my sister's visa went through, their refugee paperwork went through. And so they ended up coming to the United States. They landed at JFK airport with my brother, was there waiting for them. And then when they went through their paperwork processes, whatever they were doing with INS, which is the Immigration Naturalization Services here in the US, the presiding immigration judge felt so bad that there were 5 minors, my siblings and I, still living as refugees in another country. The mother just passed away and the father's here. So he quickly did our paperwork and we were here by August of the same year. And that usually never happens. And so we were one of the lucky ones to come to the United States as fast at that rate, because that usually does not happen. We would have been here a little bit earlier, but I think a few of us ended up getting chickenpox, so we ended up having to wait. But even then, 3 months is not that bad at all. When you look through this whole concept of immigration and people coming to the United States, fleeing war as refugees. So we landed at JFK Airport as well. And I grew up in Queens, New York City. So Rabbi Susan and I have that New York City vibe in us. I lived there, went to school, went to college, got my degree there. I ended up getting married when I was 20, way too young, but it happened. And then around 16 years ago, my husband and my two daughters at that time ended up moving to Northern Virginia, and we settled here. And about 6 years ago, I went through a divorce. And so my kids are with me 24/7. They have not seen their father in 6 years. He ended up abandoning us, and then he left Islam and converted to Christianity, although he was born into a Muslim family. And you know, his right, his life, his right. He can do what he pleases. But this part of my life really has changed a lot of my perception about a lot of things that I had to go through in raising 4 daughters by myself and doing everything by myself, and looking at things from the lens of women and the struggles that we go through, you know, having to come to a country, learning English as a new language, understanding that my mom was no longer here. All of these things, you know, play a role in who we are as human beings, but it also gives you the ability to say that you can, you know, weather any storm and get through whatever life puts in your way. Right now, my eldest daughter is 20. She's a junior in the arts program at VCU in Richmond. My second one is 18 and a half. She's starting Nova this year as a freshman. And my 2 little ones are almost 14 and 12. So in a couple of years, my little one will be off to college too. So I'm praying for that. I'm just taking them one day at a time and one child at a time, and making sure that I give them what they need. And I'm really grateful for the fact that I live in this country, because although we have a lot of problems and we have a lot of things that we need to fix, you know, obviously we know that with what you know, the enslaved had to go through. And then me and my family having to come here as refugees, because we were able to come in, being forced to come into this country. And then we were able to come in and seek refuge. The stories are a little different, but it's interesting that America is actually playing that role in immigration. But I'm really grateful that I'm here, because I'm able to raise my kids on my own, and I do have a voice, and I do get the opportunity to do a lot of things that I know I would not be able to do if I was still in Afghanistan. And to be honest with you, I probably wouldn't be alive had we stayed. So that's pretty much the sum of some of the overview of my life.
Wow. Wow. What a story. What a journey. You know, I was sitting here and I was taking in the information about you, and at the same time I was like, don't you cry on screen, Sabrina. It is.
No, we welcome crying. We're big advocates of crying. I was trying to actually control myself from crying. I was like, you know, when I start talking about my mom, I just go into a different phase, and I have to pull myself back in. But yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and I was thinking, looking at all of us, I'm the only immigrant here that wasn't born in the United States. And so I already put it out there, I cannot run for president. So in case anybody was wondering.
Oh, but I mean, just thinking about the stories of resilience that we all have from our families' journeys and even our own. And then as women of faith who are raising our children, whether we have a partner or not, that, we're continuing the legacy of our families in many different ways. And so I just, Harinisa, just thinking about your story and just and just hearing, this survivor that's just doing so many amazing things, and as a great role model to your daughters, and even thinking about your dad, the things that he had to give up, and then of course the loss of your mom. What is it that you pass on to your daughters in sharing stories of your own journey and your resilience?
That's a conversation I have with my kids all the time, but at the same time they see it, and I rather them see it than anything else. And my father passed away about I would say 12 years ago. So, you know, I wasn't even 30 at that point when he passed away. So majority of my kids don't even know my side of the family when it comes to their grandparents. But I show them that it doesn't matter whether you're married or a single mom or struggling, you can get through it. And as women, we can do it. And we women really have to work hard to build each other up. You know, we have a lot of things working against us, especially with all three of us working in the faith industry or in the faith world. You know, there are a lot of blocked doors that come our way. We don't get the seat at the table sometimes. Our voices are not heard. And I'm the type that, because of, I think, everything that I've gone through, will not take no for an answer. So if you're not going to give me a seat at the table and you're not going to give me a platform to speak, well, I'm going to create one myself. And that's where this podcast came from, because women need to speak. Women need to speak for one another. We need to build one another up. And my daughters see that. I mean, they see the things I'm doing. They see the places I'm going. You know, I do tell them about it because I want them to know that just because you're a single mom, as a Muslim and as a woman in hijab, that you cannot not do things. You know, if I tell them, like, if I have an invitation to a really cool place, this is where I'm going. Or if I'm talking about my choir, which is the only masjid youth choir in this whole country, because I have a music background, I tell them about that, because life should not stop you from growing. The things that happen in your life should actually enhance it. You should use it as a platform and as a strength to move forward, not to allow it to bring this gate in front of you where you're thinking you're stuck. I mean, for so many times in my life, I could have said I'm stuck, especially when my marriage broke and I was left with 4 small children at that time to raise. But I'm not stuck, and I'm grateful to God for having given me that. And, you know, being an advocate of that for women, I think for me is something that I feel like I need to give back. And I love having these conversations, and I love you two being here with me and going through this journey together.
Yes.
And Herneasa, I wanted, you know, I've heard this story before, and every time I'm just amazed at your strength and sense of not just the reflection of where you've been, but also, and Sabrina talked about it as being a survivor, but also the way in which you've thrived and brought strength. And I know that your faith is an important part of that journey. And we've talked about this in terms of the role of women in various faith traditions, and certainly in Islam. I'm wondering if you could share briefly how your faith and how Islam has provided that strength and that community for you in those times of challenge.
Absolutely. My faith is like the pillar of my life. I remember growing up, my father wasn't a religious person per se, but he made sure we learned to pray. Like, I was 5 years old, he would wake us up for the before dawn prayer, and we're like half asleep, and he's like, pray. And I'm like, I need to sleep, but we would get up and pray, right? He wasn't strict on hijab or anything like that. He actually didn't like it when I started wearing hijab. And when I started college, my freshman year, he was like, what are you doing? You're not Arab. Why are you wearing that? But he made sure that we had a spiritual connection to God. And because of that, and having that around me, I started speaking to God at a very early age. I remember being extremely young and having conversations with God all the time. And I think that's what kind of guided me and gave me the strength in my life, knowing the verses of the Quran where God says he will not test you with anything more than you can bear. And my favorite verse in the Quran is it's in chapter 7, which is titled Ibrahim, verse 14, where God says, if you are grateful, I will give you more. And I think that resonated with me so much, because no matter what you're going through, you could be like living off the street with nothing. Even at that point, if you're grateful for having eyes to see and a mouth to talk with and ears to hear with, that God will still give you more. And I've seen it, I'm telling you, in my life. I have seen when I'm thinking I'm stuck somewhere, God's mercy comes from some other way. Like, it's not even me, right? I can't take credit for it. So my relationship with God is one that I hold extremely dear, and I'm very grateful for it. And I thank God that I have that, because this has actually held my hand through everything that has come my way, where, like, it's okay, it could be worse. God is going to pull me through it, and he always has. So
that is
the benefit of it.
That is beautiful. I think it's also beautiful that we have this connection with our fathers. My father used to have us get up every morning at 6 a.m. to pray. And so it was something that was a part of our families. But to connect all three of us, even the aspect of music, like there's music in each one of our families. My grandfather was a part of a band. So I think that it's there's so much more, I think, as we continue to talk that will keep us even more connected and to learn more about one another. So
absolutely. And that's the great part of all three of us, bringing our own faith tradition, our own background, but the fact that we're women, right? We're the same. The fact that we take care of our family, we're the same. Rabbi Susan has her family, her husband there, and she's working through that. Sabrina and I are going through this whole single mom situation, and figuring that out. And but at the end of the day, our struggles are sometimes the same. We just don't see it that way, right?
Right.
But the fact that we can come together and talk about our faith and talk about how this connection that we have to God in our own way has allowed us to be friends, right? To respect one another, to take this relationship and have it help other people around the world. Our podcast has actually been listened to in so many different countries. Like when I saw the list, I was shocked. I was like, what? In Japan? Like, oh, okay, I'll take that, right? But because it's different. We're so different, but so alike. And that's the beauty of what we are here at Sister Act. So I want to thank both of you for coming on and sharing your stories and us learning about one another. I'm hoping this COVID thing ends soon. I'm praying for everyone's health so that we can meet in person and go back to the studio and do these things via that way. Although this is fun too, because people get to see us and we get to see each other on video and have this really natural discussion.
Kids come in and
it wouldn't be Zoom or Facebook Live if the kids don't come in. I have mine on lockdown. Like, you can't come here. I don't want to hear you. If I hear you, it's gonna be good.
You saw how all that worked today.
It's all good. That means we're real, and that's what we want, right? We want people to see that we're normal human beings. So,
yes.
If you guys have any last thoughts before we sign off, please take the floor.
I would just add that I think it was, of course, to be expected that someone would come in, but I think also that's part of what we share too, is this idea of not just raising our children, but also teaching our children, making sure they know their roots and their legacies and our histories, but also about the importance of this relationship and these conversations and the dialogue, and hoping that when, it's not just about us getting together, but at some point our children as well. And I think that's an important lesson, even if they know that they have to be on, high alert or in lockdown while we're doing this and having this conversation each week. I think the idea of it is also something that that is so important, and is a way of teaching and acknowledging the importance of having dialogue and of learning about our different stories as different faith groups as well, and different religions, and recognizing that we learn from each other, and it deepens our own connections and commitments to our own faith.
Absolutely, I agree. I mean, it's been an honor to sit and listen and to hear your narratives and your stories. I believe that stories bring people closer together and help people to get a deeper sense of the person. And they chip away at bias, they chip away at, just assumptions about people. And I think this has just been a gift to me to hear your narratives and to hear more about your faith and what shapes you as a person, and then also the things that we're passing on to our children. And I'm mindful of the fact that my son is 12, so we both have 12-year-olds.
I have a 12-year-old too.
Oh, you have a 12-year-old too. So there we go, another connection. Like, we just keep
the number.
So yes, so
maybe they could do something together.
Yeah, absolutely. So no, this is a joy and a gift, and I look forward to continuing this journey with you ladies. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Rabbi Susan.
You joined us, Sabrina.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vanessa, for getting this all started, and for you know, your sister may have said that you were bossy. I like to call it leadership.
Yes.
And the way that you've been able to
Exactly.
bring us together, and then just to watch as this grows and blossoms. It's really beautiful, and it's such a blessing to be part of this. So thank you.
Oh,
Yes.
no. Thank you.
Absolutely. Harney said you have that Shirley Chisholm spirit where she said, if they're not going to give me a seat at the table, I'm going to bring my own. So, yes.
Right. That's right. That's where we're going, girl.
Yes.
I'm tired of having to wait. So, you know, we'll take over the world one day.
Yes. We'll make room for each other at the table, because that's the thing, women know how to do that. Like, you know, if we're at the table, we then make space for others, and that's the way it should be. The table should continue to expand. So yes.
Yeah, and we'll set the example right.
Yes.
All right, ladies, thank you so much for coming on. This was amazing. I can't wait for next week and the week after and all the other episodes we're going to do together. And I will see you next week.
Yes. See you next week. Have a good
night.
one.
Good to be with you.
You too.